Hey there, art nerds. I have another wintry papercraft for you guys today. The assembly itself is pretty simple, but the cutting is what'll really get you. So today we are turning Kara, or the character of your choice, into an ice princess ornament. This is a start to finish tutorial, so I'll show you how to do it. And by start to finish, I mean we are starting from scratch. So I have a thumbnail design of what I sort of want for Kara as an ice princess to look like. And I am referencing ice princesses, ice ballerinas from ballet, because that's the kind of feel that I want. For last year's ornaments, we had Kara as a 2021 New Year's baby and a sugar plum fairy for 2020. So I thought keeping the ballet theme would be really cute for this year. So I'm starting by drawing a rough gesture of the pose and then blocking it in using volumetric drawing. And I talked about volumetric drawing in yesterday's Papercraft tutorial a little bit, but basically we're taking basic 3D volumetric forms and using that to construct something more complicated. And I've got some great tutorials on how you can learn how to draw anything using volumetric drawing that I hope you guys will check out. And I've kind of sketched in where I want her clothes to go so I can kind of get the flow and the feel. And the clothes are based on several different ballet designs. I wanted something that was kind of light and airy and ethereal while still kind of keeping her warm. So I opted to go for a little fur-lined cape and little fur booties as well. And I think that really sells the coldness. So with this design, and this is where I'm gonna heed you off at the pass. This snowflake is very pretty and very cute, and it was a huge hand killer to cut out. So if you have a Cricut or you like fussy cutting by hand, you can continue on. But what I would recommend you do is don't even worry about painting or cutting out the snowflake, either the one in her hand or the one going around her head. You can use a cut paper snowflake, where you fold the paper, cut it out, and put that around her. That would be super cute, especially if you have like a hollow kind of paper, holographic, or you have like a glitter paper or a silvery paper, something like that would be so pretty. You could even do like a doily around her. So for this design, I wanted to embellish the heck out of it because generally I keep my papercraft designs really simple and free of real world and 3D elements. And I really wanted to go all out with the adhesive jewels and with the glitter and with holographics. So you guys will see that a little bit later on. But if you happen to have like a foil quill or like an embossing machine, that could be super cute for this design. Really feel free to go totally ham. And if you do that, I would love to see what you make. I'm always looking for new ideas. So please tag me at Nattosoup, Nattosoup, because I would love to check out what you make. So once I have the design completely penciled in, it's time to start inking. And I'm inking with a Sakura Pigma FB brush pen. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. If you don't feel like drawing and inking your own paper child, you just want to color along, I've got printables for my wonderful, amazing art nerds over on Patreon. They are a backer exclusive, so if you join right now, you'll gain access to the line art printable that you can color yourself, or an already colored watercolor printable, so that way you can just focus on having fun and assembling this. So while I'm inking, I'm also refining some of the details on this illustration. There were some areas that I felt like when I penciled it, I was like, oh yeah, I could definitely ink that. And then when it came time to inking it, I was like, oh, I need to tighten this up just a little bit. That's pretty common for my workflow. I'll often go back and forth and adjust things and add details and kind of tighten things up as I really need them. And I'm using kind of a blotter sheet. I'm using a sheet of copy paper under my hand. And this is just to prevent smearing the graphite, smearing the ink while it's still wet, because it will absorb a little bit of that ink. And this is a big illustration. oxygen saver using a blotter sheet like this. And it'll also prevent me from getting some of the oils on my hand onto the paper, which might inadvertently cause a little bit of a resist when I'm watercoloring it. So I penciled this with an HB mechanical pencil since that's what I'm really comfortable with. If you're going to be penciling with the intention of inking and then erasing, I would recommend you use a harder lead, but not too hard, because the harder leads can kind of cut into the paper and then become impossible to erase. So I would really recommend something in the HB range. And I'm using a mechanical pencil because I hate having to stop what I'm doing to sharpen pencils, and I want the same like tip to my pencil the whole time. So it just makes my workflow a lot easier, and it means I can ink and draw with fewer distractions. So if you're working along at home and you'd like to use a colored line art, I'm a big fan of colored line arts. I think they're so cute. I would recommend you use the Tombow Fudenosuke brush pens. They're available in a wider array of colors, including neons, and they are also waterproof and alcohol marker proof. So if you're looking for a way to kind of add a little bit of liveliness to your paper crafts, that could be a way to do it. And if you're looking for more fun paper craft tutorials and projects, I've got a bunch of them here on the channel. I just finished up sharing 14 days of paper craftmas. Last year, I just about lost my mind, quite frankly, and I did a different paper craft for almost every day in December. I did the first 14 days of December, and oh, it was a lot. This year, I'm trying to curate. I reined it in. I only have 3, technically 4 if you count the twofer that we did yesterday. I have 3 designs for you guys, 2 standee designs, and 1 ornament like this one here. Although, with a little ingenuity, you could turn this one into a standee as well. It's really kind of up to you. So now that my inks are finished, I'm going to allow them to dry, to cure to the paper for 24 hours before I attempt to erase my pencils. I erase them using a soft white vinyl eraser. Those are my favorite. I find that they are the least prone to smearing, to smudging, to lifting the ink, to causing ghosting. I really like them. I then scan this so that my patrons could have it as a line art. And now I'm applying some 3M blue painter's tape to our Canson XL watercolor paper just to secure it while we're painting. For this illustration, I'm not going to bother with stretching it. I don't really think that's necessary, but I am securing it down with some painter's tape and some binder clips. And I'm securing it to a piece of coroplast or gator board, you know what they use for political signs, but you could use some chipboard from, say, the back of a sketchbook, just to give it some structural stability while we're painting it. And I'm painting with my Qor Mini Palette. I talked about this quite a bit yesterday. It's a great little 12 color palette. I highly recommend it, especially if you're interested in getting into watercolor and you don't mind spending a little extra money, or you're somebody who has less space for traditional media. This is a really small, compact palette. It can mix a wide array of colors, and Qor watercolors are really high quality. I reviewed them a couple years ago and have been in love with them ever since, and I've been using them for my paper trail paper crafts because they don't take up a lot of space. I can mix all of the colors that I need, and I can keep my color palette fairly consistent. So for Kara's lighter skin tone, I'm using a really light wash of burnt sienna. And this is a really easy watercolor tutorial today. I talked about a lot of the basic techniques that I'm going to use yesterday in yesterday's paper craft. So I'm going to focus on some new things. So when painting white, I like to use a really light wash of ultramarine blue just to kind of paint the shadows. I don't like leaving the paper entirely white for large chunks. So for the white fur trim, for her skirt, even for her leggings. So for her stockings, I painted a base color of her skin tone first, and then I applied our blue on top of it. And that gives the impression that there's actual legs underneath the stockings and that she's not wearing these really thick, opaque tights. So to build up my white, I allow it to dry, and then I add a little bit more of our ultramarine blue into the solution just to kind of build up that color. And I really wanted to give it this kind of cool, icy blue, so I mixed in some of the phthalo blue, which is right next to it, which gives us kind of a truer blue. Ultramarine blue is such a warm, granulating blue. It's a really beautiful color, but it was a little warmer than what I wanted for this. I really wanted to give that impression of an ice princess ballerina. So if you're not familiar with my work, I'm painting Kara, the main character from my comic, 7-inch Kara. You can read it as a webcomic, or if you'd love to give it as a gift, you can buy this watercolor comic through my site, natosoup.com/shop, or like I said, you can read it as a webcomic at 7inchkara.com. And if you read Kara, please let me know what you think of it. I always want to hear back from you guys, and your feedback really does mean the world to me. I have the first 8 chapters up on the webcomic, and both print volumes include some special, never shared online extras that are exclusive to each book. So I hope you guys will really check it out and let me know what you guys think of it. But anyway, it's a charming story about a 7-inch tall little girl who's been kind of sheltered from the rest of the world, and her parents are keeping a huge secret. Finally, her mom spills the beans and reveals to Kara that humans are indeed real and not just the stuff of legends or myths. And Kara sets off to meet one for herself. Along the way, she befriends a friendly little black kitten and meets Naomi, a human teenager. She gets to try different human foods, and although the differences between the two girls are huge, they still find a lot of common ground in their loneliness and in their family situations. So I hope you guys will give 7-inch Kara a shot. I hope you guys will check it out and let me know what you think. So every year I try to do some different papercraft designs. So papercraft is basically where you turn 2-dimensional objects, like this piece of paper with an illustration of Kara, into 3-dimensional or 2.5D objects. And that requires just a little bit of clever paper engineering. And I find papercraft to be so fun, and I love being able to share that with you guys. It makes my characters feel a little bit more real. So even though she's an ice princess, I did want her to look alive and lively. So I'm using alizarin crimson to add some blush to her cheeks, to her nose, to her lips, to her fingertips, just to add some life and liveliness. I have a lot of great watercolor tutorials, including some how to paint comic tutorials if you're interested in comics here on the channel. And hopefully you guys will check those out. Those will walk you really step by step through my watercolor and painting process. But basically, for illustrations like this one, my painting process is pretty simple. It's really limited to just a couple of techniques. The first of which is layering, where I'm just applying color on top of color on top of color to build up our form, our contrast, and our volume. It's a very simple technique. And on occasion, I might use a little bit of wet into wet. So that is adding a new or more saturated version of the color into the color while it's still wet, so that the color can kind of diffuse out and the two can kind of mingle together. Those are the 2 basic techniques that I use when I'm painting a simple illustration like this one on cellulose watercolor paper. Cellulose watercolor paper, like this Canson XL watercolor paper here, is not really capable of handling a lot of really advanced watercolor techniques like I might use on cotton rag paper, but it's very accessible and it's gonna stand up to what we're gonna be putting it through when we turn this into a papercraft activity. If you don't want to cut out your own original watercolor illustration, and that is what I'm going to be doing today, but you don't have to, I would recommend that you go ahead and scan it after you've painted it and print it out on a heavier paper, like cardstock weight, 90-pound weight, something like that. So what I would recommend you do, if your printer can't handle that, is take it to a place like Office Depot or Office Max, where they have these large toner printers that can print on heavier weight stocks. So most of the watercolor illustration is completed. I'm just going to add in some white highlights and white details using some white gouache, which is an opaque watercolor. Since I plan on bedazzling the heckaroony out of this illustration, I'm not really adding a lot of details here in the painting stage. I'm going to leave that for when I get out my glitter and glitz and can decorate this papercraft. But if you are following along at home, if you're making your own, feel free to decorate yours however you want to. And once your watercolor illustration has fully and completely dried, you can remove it from the support surface. So I'm removing my binder clips one by one, and then I'm going to remove my blue painter's tape by pulling away at a 90-degree angle away from the illustration, just in case it tears. That way it won't tear into the illustration, it'll just tear kind of the frame around the paper. And here we have our completed watercolor illustration with the materials that I used to paint it. If you're looking for some great watercolor supply recommendations, boy, oh boy, do I have you guys covered. I'll make sure to try to link those down in the description below. I recommend you always check out my descriptions because I always try to have everything you need plus some bonus goodies in there. And here's what you'll need to cut out and assemble today's Papercraft. We've got popsicle sticks, we've got single-sided tape, we've got an Xacto Blade, we've got rhinestones and mini pearls, we've got double stick tape, we've got single-sided tape, we've got some tacky glue, we've got ribbon, and we've got scissors. And you can choose to use whatever you wish to decorate this. So the first thing I did is I cut away some of the excess paper, and I used my paper cutter to make sure that I get nice straight lines for that. That's particularly important when we're building a standee or a self-standing paper child. This is an ornament, so it's not quite as important. So if you have a Cricut or some other kind of cutting machine, I would highly recommend you use it for this project if you want to get really fussy cutting everything out, because I frankly wrecked my hand and had a lot of problems with this. As you guys can see, it actually took an hour for me to finish cutting it out. I really struggled with all that fine fussy cutting, and as somebody with early onset arthritis, you really don't want to strain your hand more than necessary. And I spent all this time trying to cut out that teeny tiny snowflake that she's holding, and I ended up deciding it wasn't worth the effort, and I just snipped it off. And I'll show you guys how to make something that is just as cute and much easier to do. So rather than fussy cutting around the snowflake, so you see I accidentally overcut some, so I'm going to use some single-sided tape on the back just to stabilize it. But instead of all this fussy cutting, what you could do is you could buy pre-cut mini paper snowflakes, you could use a doily around her head, you could use your Cricut or other cutting machine to cut out some snowflake shapes, and that would be really cute. Or you can, you know the paper folding technique where you fold a snowflake. I'm sure there's like a million tutorials online on how to do that. You could do a tiny one and put it around her head as a halo. Or you could choose to do nothing at all and just have her wearing her little tiara. All of those would be super cute. But since this was so tedious and hard on my hands, and it was the majority of the work time for this particular illustration, I would recommend skipping it, especially if you're doing this project with younger artists. That can just be really frustrating. It was frustrating for me, so I'm sure it could be really frustrating for them. So even though it is very cute, you could just skip it. So instead of the snowflake, I'm actually going to use one of the pom-poms from yesterday's Papercraft. And you can find these kind of pom-poms at most arts and crafts stores. You probably can find them at Dollar Tree right now. I just didn't see them at my Dollar Tree. And I'm using some silver cord that I picked up at Michael's. I'm wrapping the tape around it. I'm going to cut in the middle of the tape, and that prevents both ends from fraying. I would recommend, if you're gonna do the pom-pom on a string route, you do this early on because your glue is gonna take a while to dry. And initially when I bought the tacky glue, I wasn't sure how well this would work out, but I'm finding that it's actually working out quite well for this project. So generally when I'm doing paper crafts, I don't like to use glue because it adds moisture to the paper and it can cause warping, but there are glues that are intended to be quick dry glues that use different solvents. So if you want to, you could use a super glue. Although super glues tend to be kind of brittle, you could use a super glue for this project. But for pretty much everything that's involving the paper, minus some of the sequins we're going to use later on, I'm using double stick tape and single-sided tape to adhere everything. So I want to give her some structure because I am going to be taping and gluing and adhering a whole bunch of stuff to her. So I'm using a popsicle stick. This is a larger popsicle stick. The smaller ones will work well too, to give her some structure. If you're working using a Cricut, you could actually just cut out two of Qor and sandwich them together, and that'll also give you some structural stability. And to give her legs and arms some stability as well, I'm using some of the scrap paper that we reserved when we were cutting her out, and I'm cutting kind of like 2 duplicates, sandwiching them together, and I'm going to tape those down her legs and down her arms. You don't have to add all this structural stability, especially if you don't plan on embellishing this project too much, but frankly, I like to use these year after year, so I like to build them pretty sturdy. And I know that some of you guys are in houses where you have small children, so I figure it's better to build these paper things much sturdier than they need to be, to over-engineer them, and that way they can actually withstand a little bit of play. So now that we've reinforced our tiny dancer, I want to start preparing the loop that I'm going to hang her from. And you can use a pre-existing loop, you can use a little wire hanger if you want to, but I'm going to use the same silver cord that I used to hang her snowball. And I've got some single-sided tape, and I'm just going to wrap it around both ends at the bottom, and then a little bit later on I'm going to go ahead and tape it to the back. You could knot it if you want to, but honestly the tape method works really well, and it's pretty sturdy and it's very simple. So these are the materials that I'm going to use to embellish my paper child. I've got lots of glitters and even some adorable polymer clay. They call them glitter, but they're more like a sequins, and I think they're really sold to be included in resin crafts, but you can glue them down here. So I'm starting out by using a gel pen to embellish the snowflake going around her head, and I'm using the Arteza gel pens, and these don't really work that well. So if you've got something with a lot of glimmer, glitter, or iridescence, that would look really cute. These look like they're going to be really silver, but they dry basically clear. I also used the blue gel pen just to add in some shading, and that's a really cute technique, and I'm not really mad at how it turned out. Of course, I end up totally covering it with glitter and sequins a little bit later on, but I wanted to present a bunch of different embellishment ideas for you guys so you guys can work with what you've got at home. And gel pens are a great, easy way to add a little sparkle and a little detail to your paper crafts. So I want Qor to be really icy and shiny, and that means glitter. So I'm going to use some of the tacky glue, and unfortunately the tacky glue doesn't really have a fine tip. So what I ended up doing is I ended up kind of globbing it on, and then I used a paintbrush to spread it out to make sure that I got all of the snowflake. Another technique you can use is you can put it inside like a bottle cap and dab it on from there. And the tacky glue is kind of great. I got it at Dollar Tree, very inexpensive, and it gets sticky faster than say Elmer's glue, so it'll actually adhere your stuff quicker so you can work a little bit faster. And if you're impatient like me, that's great. And it also doesn't add a whole lot of surface moisture, which might reactivate your paints, or it might cause colors to run, or it might cause your paper to warp. Now, it does add some, so you want to be careful. So I'm working on a sheet of paper, and I just kind of sprinkled the glitter haphazardly because I'm going to clean that off a little bit later on. And while that's drying, I've got several different sizes of iridescent glitter that I'm going to very carefully apply by hand. Now, I would highly recommend, if you do like diamond painting, or if you do like nail art, using the tools from that to apply your glitter is going to be so much easier than me using my fingers and my busted up nails to try to carefully apply individual sequences and pieces of glitter. Even a pair of tweezers would work really well because these things are super staticky. But hey, if you've got basically nothing like I have here, then hey, we're on the same page, and this is at least a demonstration of how you can do it. So I didn't want to cover her with these large chunky glitters, so I'm using a paintbrush, and this is a synthetic paintbrush. It's actually one of the Arteza paintbrushes. I don't really care about them, and they're already pretty busted up from doing the Arteza challenge. I'm using that to apply my tacky glue, and I'm just kind of doing spot treatments of the sequins. And I have to say, I went kind of whole hog on this and over applied it, especially a little bit later on to her snowflake crown. But you know what? 2021 has been a hard year, and we could all use a little bit of glitter and glamour in our lives, and I have never been afraid of tacky. So I went all out with this one. So if you're using a paintbrush to apply your glue, I would recommend that you don't allow the glue to ever fully dry in your paintbrush, and that you clean it out in between applications using warm water and possibly a little dish soap, which is why it's important that you don't use your nice brushes for this. I also have these super cute polymer clay mini snowflakes that I'm applying using the same techniques, just a little bit of glue applied to where I want to put them, and then I hand place them. But again, tweezers or nail art tools would probably be a lot easier. So once the glue on her snowflake crown totally dried, I used a soft drafting brush to remove the glitter from her face. And I did this over a trash can. And I basically just picked up my whole sheet of paper and dumped all my excess glitter in the trash, which allows me to keep my work area fairly clean, because anybody who's worked with glitter knows glitter gets everywhere. So the glitter that I applied to her snowflake crown wasn't really glittery enough, so I decided to glitter it even more with hand-applied sequins. And honestly, this kind of obscured the fact that she's wearing a snowflake crown, so you may opt to skip this step or handle it differently. Rhinestones or pearls would also look very, very cute. But dang it, I really wanted her to look snowy and frosty and iridescent-y, kind of like a bright, sunny, snowy morning. I might live in Southeast Louisiana now, and I might have been raised here in Southeast Louisiana, but I did spend 10 years in Nashville, and that's long enough for me to know that I hate snow. But I love drawing snow, and I love Qor as an ice princess, and that counts for something, right? So because I didn't zhuzh it up quite enough with hand-applied sequins, I've got these small adhesive rhinestones, and they are designed to come off as an entire strip. So what I found is that if I cut along like vertically, it kind of frees up the individual rhinestones. So those rhinestones you guys saw, the blue and clear ones, those are from Dollar Tree, and I bought them to apply to like the center of her outfit, and they don't even work. So don't buy the rhinestones from Dollar Tree. So finally, it's time to adhere her snowball or snowflake and the loop, and I'm just using some double-sided tape and some clear single-sided tape. And I'm taping down the loop on the back using the single-sided tape. I'm going to use the double-sided tape to kind of place the snowball and hold it in place, and then a really thin strip of the single-sided tape to tape it down. And there we have it, our Qor as an ice princess or a snow princess or a snowball princess is completed. All we have to do is wait for the glue to fully dry, and then we can hang her on our tree, or you could hang her from a window, or you could display her as a standee, or whatever makes your heart happy. And even though she's got a whole lot of glitter going on, I think she turned out super cute, and she looks so adorable on my tiny little white Christmas tree. And I think this is going to end up being my art tree because it's also got the Arteza art challenges bedecking the boughs. So what do you guys think? Are you going to try making your own? I'm going to have links for my wonderful patrons on Patreon where they can download and print out the line art and the colored watercolor illustration. Speaking of, here they are. Thank you guys so much for your help and your support and your encouragement over 2021. And may your 2022 be merry, safe, and bright. Bye, guys.